Good morning, children. In the last chapter, we read about Indus Valley Civilization, which was a Bronze Age civilization, and as the name suggests, it had spread along the river banks of Indus and its tributaries. Its main features were that it was an urban civilization, it had advanced level of town planning, it had world's most advanced underground drainage system, it had a system of water storage or rainwater harvesting as can be seen from the sites at Dholavira. It had advanced level of craft and agricultural production. The surplus production led to widespread trade inland and overseas. There was a large-scale standardization in town planning, use of grid pattern in construction of roads and drainage, excellent amount of standardization in weights and measures, in the level of craft production. All this required supervision of the highest order by some state agencies and a large-scale organization of management of labor. Seals of IVC show how authentication and identification was done. This civilization, which began in 3300 BCE, that is the earliest phase, and matured by 2600 BCE, finally started to decline by 1900 BCE, that is the mature phase of the civilization, and then gradually by 1700 BCE, even the later phase of the civilization had also declined. There are four main possible causes for decline of this civilization. A, climate change. The change course of the river may be because of constant silting. B, earthquakes, flooding, and other natural phenomena. C, gradual decline of major centers of civilization led to decline of smaller centers also. And finally, the Aryan invasion. Our main source of study of this civilization are archaeological sources. That is, the material remains, the artifacts, and all the things which have come out in the excavation of more than 1,000 documented sites which have been excavated by various experts of the world in different parts of this region, spreading from Afghanistan to Pakistan and parts of Western India. It was one of the most advanced urban civilizations of the world. But when it ended, then there was a long period of lack of any civilization. So in our second chapter, we will read about how the new centers of settlement appeared in first in western part of India and then in northwestern part of India, gradually spreading along the Ganges basin to the Deltic region and finally over to central India and parts of Deccan India. Now let us study about the next centers of civilization which appeared around 600 BC to 600 CE. Today we'll be studying about what all developments happened in this period and how the growth of new towns happened. After the Indus Valley civilization declined, in next 1500 years, after the end of the Harappan civilization, the following important developments took place. Indus Valley civilization declined and Aryans came to India. They established their centers in different parts of Western India, the areas previously occupied by the Indus Valley people. Aryans were pastoral nomadic bands of people who migrated from place to place in search of pasture lands. New agricultural settlements by Aryans emerged in different parts of India, not only along the river valleys of Indus and its tributaries. One of the principal reasons for this was extensive use of iron by the Aryans. They had brought with them the iron smelting and iron forging techniques which were unknown to the Indus Valley people. Also, new burial practices emerged in different parts of India, and we find emergence of megaliths. These are the large stones to mark a burial site. These emerged in central and south India from 1st millennium BCE. Another very important development which happened was that extensive use of iron for tool making, for agricultural purposes, and also for the purpose of war. Now, use of iron made it possible to make tools for cutting of the forest, which was very thick and had hard wood. As a result of this, new pasture lands or new forest could be now used for agricultural purposes. Extension of agriculture happened in areas away from the river valleys. IBC people had this limitation because they were only using copper, nickel, lead, etc. Also, we find in this period a lot of new burial practices emerged, and these burials had a lot of utility items buried in the graves, which we have realized that Harappan graves did not have many things buried along with the dead bodies, apart from few earthenware and maybe few pieces of jewelry. That means some different set of beliefs in afterlife were brought by the Aryans. Another important development that happened was emergence of early states known as Janpadas or Mahajanpadas in case of larger states, Ganas and Sanghas. While Janpadas and Mahajanpadas were monarchies, Ganas and Sanghas were democracies, or to put it more appropriately, republics, in which the rulers were selected by a select group of elders or wise people of the society. These new towns, which developed after 6th century BCE, spread along the river valleys of Ganga and its tributaries. Also, for this period, our main source of study is the inscriptions and the literary matter. In case of Indus Valley civilization, we have unearthed many samples of the script on various surfaces, major part of which is found on seals, and there were some signboards also, the largest signboard consisting of 26 symbols. But this was one script which was not deciphered and has not been deciphered so far also. It is not like any other known script of the world. Consequently, it is very difficult to read it. And as the script is not read, so that we cannot find out anything more about it except for the clues which are given to us by the archaeological sources. But when we come to this period between 600 BC to 600 CE, our major source of study or reconstruction of history of this period is the literary sources and also the inscriptions. Inscriptions which have been found in a large number, in a number of languages, and which describe practically every aspect of the life of people, rulers, crafts, shrenis, etc. in great detail. Therefore, epigraphy or study of inscriptions becomes our primary objective for studying or for reconstructing the history of the period between 600 BCE to 600 CE, and this gives us tremendous amount of clues about kings, farmers and towns, how they developed and what kind of political mechanism developed in this period. So this particular source of inscription helps us in reconstructing the socio-political history of this period. In this period, the most important developments in these years are coming of Aryans, who were pastoral nomadic people, the composition of Rig Veda and other four Vedas, new agricultural settlements emerging along the river banks of Ganges, development of new political institutions, some of which were monarchical, other were oligarchies, new types of burial practices, iron tools, megaliths, and emergence of early states which again organized the agricultural production extensively on a very large scale, organization of craft production, and again trade on a very large scale, emergence of, for the first time, punch mark coins. The designs were punched on it, they were irregular in shape, and they might have been issued by a number of agencies. So this also shows re-emergence of trade both inland and overseas, an extensive use of rivers for the purpose of navigation and also for the purpose of movement of army. All this study of this particular period became comparatively easier when James Princip, who was an officer in the Mint of East India Company, deciphered Brahmi and Kharoshti, these two important scripts. Rosetta Stone was found, and he found that there were a number of writings on it in different scripts. With the study of this Rosetta Stone, it became easier to understand the history of this period. In the inscriptions of that period, he found that there is a king by the name of Piyadasi, meaning pleasant to behold or good to look at. And this king is described in great detail. Later on, historians identified this king as Ashoka. Earliest inscriptions were written in a number of languages. Some were in Prakrit, which was the language of the ordinary people. Others were in Tamil, Pali, and Sanskrit. When we go to northwestern part of India, then some inscriptions in Greek and Aramaic were also found. Study of these inscriptions in a detailed manner led to discovery of political history, as a lot of literary data helped in reconstruction of lineage of major dynasties that had ruled the subcontinent. A broad matter was collected on the political history by the early decades of 20th century. Finally, the scholars began to shift their focus to the context of political history, investigating whether there were connections between the political changes, economic and social developments. It soon revealed that there were links, but these were not always simple or direct. Now, in this particular segment, you must find out about why is the 6th century BCE regarded as the turning point in early Indian history. 6th century BCE is regarded as a major turning point in earlier Indian history because it is a period which is associated with development of new states, growth of new cities, second phase of urbanization in India, a period which came into existence because of extensive use of iron, the development of first ever coinage system. This was also a period which saw emergence of diverse system of thought, including Buddhism and Jainism, which challenged Brahmanism. Early Buddhist and Jain text and also the Puranic text in Sanskrit and Buddhist and Jain text in Pali and Prakrit language give us details about the socio-political system of this period. Prior to that, Indus Valley civilization followed simple religious practices. Probably they worshipped prototype of Shiva and maybe Shivlingas, and nature worship in the form of sacred plants and sacred animals. But religion was very simplified, maybe some ritual baths. In this period, we find religion becomes quite complex. Also, the emergence of 16 states known as Mahajanpadas was a major political development of the period. Many states like Vaji, Magadha, Koshala, Kuru, Panchala, Gandhara, Avanti, etc. constantly fought with each other in order to increase their area of influence and to increase the size of their empire. There were other kind of political states which were known as ganas or sanghas. These were oligarchies where the power was shared by a number of men. These people were collectively selected by a group of elders called Sabha, and these people were collectively called Rajas. Raja was just a title. They followed a tribal system of kingship, and both Mahavira and Buddha belonged to such ganas. Also, we find that the Sanghas, while they were republics, they also had a fair amount of democratic values, and were smaller kingdoms. Their control over the resources was limited. Their area of influence was also limited. And this entire development continued for over 1,000 years. The Mahajanpadas, on the other hand, had more control over resources, had more complex socio-political economic systems, and each Mahajanpada had a capital city, it was fortified, it had a regular army which was well paid, it had a large bureaucracy which supervised in various departments, whereas Ganas had lesser amount of political sources, Ganas had less control over the resources, it had smaller political units, it had non-permanent army raised from the farmers, and all the people of a Gana belonged to a large clan. Now the term Janapada actually means where Jana or people or a clan or a tribe first settles down and that makes that territory its own. That area occupied by the Janas of a particular clan is known as Janpad. But when we talk about Mahajanpadas, then they were large monarchical states. Mahajanpadas had developed a very complex political system. They had codified laws, they had law books like Dharma Shastras and Dharma Sutras to control the behavior of the people. These texts were written by Brahmins and they codified the behavior norms both for the king and also for various social classes. Now look at the map of India. We find that most of these new urban centers which developed were generally clustered around the Doab region of India. That is Doab, the land irrigated by two rivers, that is Ganga and Yamuna, and spread towards the deltic region. So all the important states which developed in this period need to be marked on the map. Sample map is given and you just have to look at it and accordingly mark the same in your practice maps. Also, you have to keep in mind that when you're marking the states, the current state boundaries of political outline map of India need to be kept in mind. Map practice we'll do in subsequent classes. Another very important term, again I would like to revise, that is oligarchy. What is oligarchy? It is a government where power is exercised by a group of men. And this term oligarchy, actually we in some historians have called it democratic system, but generally based on the Roman republics or the Greek city states, we can say that oligarchy was only in name. It was mostly like a republic where the head of the state was elected by a select group of members. We must remember that in these Sanskrit texts, which become our primary source for reconstruction of history of this period, a number of social categories are mentioned. By now, Rig Veda was the period in which the social classes or the Varnas were bifurcated, and in the Purusha Sukta of Rig Veda, this differentiation was done by the Brahmins, but at that time it was not hereditary and it was generally based on occupation. But gradually this system of Varna became hereditary and watertight compartment, that once you were born into a particular Varna, you could not change it. You only after death a person could be reborn into some other Varna. In this entire process, we must realize that being born into a particular Varna gave access to people to different types of occupations and gave them social positions, also control over resources and their respectability in the society. For this period, we do not know what kind of resources the state had, how they procured their taxes from the pastoralist and forest people. We know that agricultural tax and tax on trade were the main sources of income of the state. We do not know how the neighboring states reorganized a legitimate means of acquiring wealth. We do not know how these systems evolved, but gradually we find that large regular bureaucracies and large regular well-paid, permanently trained armies took shape And those states which had these control over resources, control over a permanent, regularly well-trained, well-paid army, were the states which came into prominence and became more powerful than others. Otherwise, these ganas and sanghas just had militia. Militia is that temporary army, non-permanent army which was raised from the peasantry. Your assignment is that you have to differentiate between the ganas and the Mahajanpadas. Now let us see what are the sources of history of the period 600 BC to 600 CE. One, of course, I told you, inscriptions, and there are a variety of inscriptions in a variety of languages. Then the coins, the first ever coins, that is punchmark coins, a very distinctive type of pottery, northern polished grey ware, which was found with coming of Aryans and all the sites occupied by them. Then detailed study of the sites which have been excavated, though very few have been excavated because this area is thickly populated, therefore archaeological excavations are not possible. Then all the Buddhist and Jain text, the Sanskrit text, basically the Puranas and later Puranic text, the texts written by the foreign travelers, especially Greek and Chinese, then Sanskrit literature belonging to Mauryan and the Gupta period, then Ashokan inscriptions, edicts and pillars, and other inscriptions which belong to the Gupta period or Satvana period become our primary sources of study of this period. In this segment, we will study about what were the causes for rise of Magadha, one of the largest empires of its period. Rise of Magadha can be summed up in few points. That is, Magadha emerged as the most powerful Mahajanpada of its period due to the following reasons. Between 6th and 4th century BCE, Magadha, the center of power was located in present-day Bihar, became the most powerful Mahajanpada, and the reasons for this power were that Magadha had a long lineage of powerful kings like Bimbisara, Ajatsattu, Mahapadmananda, Chandragupta, Bindusara, Ashoka, etc. And all these rulers contributed to a large extent to the stability and political power of Magadha. Apart from these rulers, Magadha also had worthy ministers and advisors like Mudra Rakshasa and Chanakya, who were very wise and good ministers and advisors to the rulers. Magadha had a very large and strong permanent army. It is reported that Mauryan army was as large as 6 lakh people, and it had whole lot of elephants in the army. Elephant was a very important resource in those days because when people had to move on foot or on horses during the war, elephants in the army decided who would win the war. Elephants were widely available in the Gangetic Delta, and therefore the rulers of Magadha had ready access to these elephants which could be trained for army. They were found in this forest region in the Ganga valley and near its tributaries. Another very important resource over which the Magadhan rulers had control was the iron mines of Jharkhand. And this control over iron mines helped them in having a variety of iron tools and weapons which established them as superior to other rulers. It attributed to its power and also the growth of Magadhan Empire. Another important factor which led to growth of Magadha as a Mahajanpada was that its location on the banks of river Ganges and its spread around the area due to strong communication links or the transportation which was provided by Ganges and its tributaries. It made it possible for rulers of Magadha to promote both inland and overseas trade because in those days navigating through river waters and then being connected to the seas also was one of the cheapest way of transportation, which was required both for quick movement of the army and also for trade purposes. There were two well-connected and strategically located capital cities that the state of Magadha had. The first capital city of Magadha was Rajgriha. In Prakrit, it is known as Rajgir, and it is located in Bihar on a hillock. It was the capital of Magadha and it was strategically located. The meaning of the word is house of king. Rajgriha was fortified settlement because it was located on the hill. In the 4th century BCE, it was a location where from the army could protect itself and could defeat all the advancing enemies. But subsequently by 4th century BCE, this capital city of Magadha was shifted to present day Patna, in those days known by the name of Patliputra. Now Patna again was very strategically located because it was located on the banks of river Ganges and it had total control over the communication lines, that is the navigational routes through Ganga and its tributaries. This again helped in quick movement of the army and also in conduct of trade. Both the capital cities were well fortified and were thickly populated. Apart from this, Magadha also became very prosperous, and this prosperity came from surplus agricultural production in the fertile alluvial plains of Ganges and its tributaries, and this surplus production led to freeing of a lot of people for other craft production activities. Development of craft led to trade and the trade developed from inland trade to overseas trade with Southeast Asian countries as well. Now this control over trade and surplus agricultural production made the kingdom of Magadha very rich. Therefore, due to these reasons, Magadha became the most important Mahajanpada of 6th century BC. Now let us learn about Mauryan Empire. Mauryan Empire was founded by Chandragupta Maurya in 321 BC in Magadha, which is the territory of modern-day Bihar. It is considered as the largest empire in India under one centralized command. It is known for its stupas, edicts of Ashoka, as he embraced Buddhism in the later part of his life. The capital city of Mauryan Empire was Patliputra or the modern-day Patna. This empire stretched over 5 million square kilometers during the reign or rule of Ashoka. The Mauryan rulers practiced absolute monarchy, meaning that they had total control over their empire, over the administration, over the army. All powers were concentrated in the hands of the king. Chandragupta had conquered satraps, that is, the provincial governors under the Persian or Iranian Empire. Chandragupta Maurya defeated Seleucus I, the founder of Seleucid Empire, and gained territory to the west of Indus River. He also got married to the daughter of Seleucus Nicator, the Greek princess. Chandragupta Maurya initially was a Hindu and later on promoted a Jivika sect of Jainism. Many historians believe that Chandragupta was of low social origin on the basis of the description given in the Sanskrit text of the period. He is described as the son of Mura, a female dasi or attendant in the court of the last Nanda ruler Dhanananda. This was against the Brahminical norms of Varna, in which different kinds of professions were assigned to different social groups. According to this, only Kshatriyas had the right to rule. But the Buddhist texts later on describe Chandragupta as son of a local chieftain. But most believe that he was of non-Kshatriya origin. His son Bindusara followed Hinduism. He became a ruler in 297 BCE, also called Amit Ghanta in the Sanskrit meaning destroyer of enemies. He extended the empire to Deccan and southern peninsula of India. He died in 273 BC. This was followed by 4 years' war of succession between the different claimants to the throne. Finally, Asoka became the ruler of Magadha. In 269 BCE, Ashoka conquered the coastal territory of Kalinga in a bloody war. Kalinga refers to the modern-day territory of Orissa. He promoted Buddhism after the Kalinga War, which had transformed him. He became a Buddhist and made Buddhism state religion. But due to this, the empire followed the principles of ahimsa and conquest by Dhamma or Dharma. Dhamma includes laws and virtues of right way of living. He organized the third Buddhist council, built stupas, orders writing of pillar inscriptions and rock edicts. Ashoka supported the creation of Buddhist sanghas, that is, monastic orders. His rule was the most peaceful and prosperous period of Magadha for next 40 years. He helped in propagation of Buddhism outside India too. But after his death, his successors were weak, and in 185 BCE, Vriddharatha, the last ruler of Mauryan dynasty, was killed by Pushyamitra Shunga, one of his generals and a Brahmin. He founded a new dynasty called the Shunga dynasty, which replaced the Mauryan dynasty. Now let us talk about important facts of Mauryan rule. Both the state and the public could engage in business activities. The state had total control over army. It was a centralized administration, hence there were large number of state officials and a large bureaucracy. Agriculture, craft production and trade were the main occupation. The king had complete political, judicial and military control. The army was 6 lakh infantry soldiers, had 30,000 cavalry, that is horse riders, 80,000 chariots, 9,000 war elephants, and thousands of attendants who provided all the supplies for the army. State collected revenue from tax on agriculture and tax on trade. State funded creation of roads and public buildings with taxes collected by it. It was politically stable and militarily strong empire. Trade with Greeks, Iran, and Central Asia was promoted through land routes, and trade with Southeast Asia was promoted through sea route. Population of the empire ranged between 50 to 60 million people, which was the largest empire of the world in its period. There were 5 major political centers of the empire which helped in controlling the empire effectively. First center was Patliputra, the capital city, and then there were 4 provincial capitals. Toshali in the east, Ujjain in the west, Swarnagiri in the south, and Takshila in the north. The provincial centers were controlled by Kumara or the royal princes as head of the provincial administration. And they had advisors like Mahamatyas and Council of Ministers. This entire provincial administrative structure reflected the administrative structure which was present at the center, where king was assisted by Mahamatya and the Mantri Parishad or Council of Ministers. Finally, Mauryan Empire declined, and the main causes for decline of Mauryan Empire were Ashoka's religious policy of ahimsa and non-Brahmanism, the financial crisis that the empire faced due to lack of resources, the vastness of the empire and one centralized administrative control. If the ruler was weak, then he had no effective control over the distant territory. Internal revolts by the non-Buddhist and Brahmanical groups. As Buddhism declined, Brahmanism reasserted itself. Magadha lost its importance as other states made extensive use of iron. Shungas, Kanavas, Chetis and Satavahanas replaced Mauryas in different parts of the empire. Finally, the foreign invasion by Scythians and Parthians, Shakas, Greeks resulted in decline of the Mauryan Empire. Since Ashoka's successors were very weak, therefore they could not face up to these challenges, and the greatest empire of ancient India, that is the Mauryan Empire, declined.